You feeling stuck lately? Like life's passing you by? Get to know M.A.Y.A.
Acronym My Ambition, Your Ambition.
Reconnect with your dreams, your goals, your ambitions. Find your motivation and start to live the life you desire. Explore the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast at M.A.Y.A.com.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to episode 17, actually 18 of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. You know, I was on the fence about doing an episode, not doing an episode, but I thought, what a great day to do an episode because it's Thanksgiving. And this is a conversation about not just being thankful, but understanding some of the emotions that go into connecting with others. And in a really difficult time, I thought, what better time should I not be present to have these good conversations with people than on Thanksgiving. So thank you for anyone who's tuned in. And most people are actually off today. So I couldn't resist the idea that I'm on at 2:30 in the afternoon. And if you're not comatose from eating already, and most people probably have not eaten yet, I figured I'd catch you right before. So as I always say with M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, I like to think that I embrace salient conversations and topics in a way that's forward thinking, fresh thinking. I could be wrong, but I tend to think I'm spot on by a lot of stuff. But this is time that's focused on you. And hopefully through listening to my episodes, and if you listen to the previous 17 of them, and I say you work at your own pace because one episode may mean more to you than the other, and that's perfectly fine. I'm glad you're here today. But if you're somewhere still back, I'll say on episode 12, great. I'm just happy that you're tuned in and listening. That works for me. So whatever you're doing, take the time. If you're listening, find a space that's maybe quiet, comfortable. Maybe you have a plate in front of you. I always say get your beverage of choice. So maybe it's coffee, tea, water. You're technically off today, so it could be a glass of wine, a beer, whatever it is going to help you find that space to be comfortable, to, kind of dial into the show for the next hour. I always say 45 minutes to an hour is where I try to keep it. We will not have on Miriam McQueen today, who's actually my musical muse. That's my live portion of the show that I've been doing. I totally enjoy where she sings a song that kind of connects with the topic that I've discussed that episode. So she will be back next week doing a live performance at the end of the show. So make sure you do. Of course, this is Miriam. Make sure you check out Miriam. You can find her at miriammcqueen.com. Make sure you follow her on Facebook and Twitter. Everything is miriammcqueen.com. Go to her website. She's on YouTube. She does original material. She has a song right now called Time is a Bomb that I really, really like. But she also does covers of other songs. Check her out. Great artist, very intuitive. I enjoy being able to share conversations with her on the show when she's here. So she'll be back next week, and the live music piece will continue always at the end of the show. So thank you to everybody who tuned in for that. Hopefully you had a chance to check it out. Give us your comments, your thoughts. Remember, you can always listen to previous episodes of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition at M.A.Y.A.com. And of course, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, M.A.Y.A. Episodes are also available. You may have a podcast platform of choice. And I'm okay with that. I won't take it personally that you won't go to M.A.Y.A.com to listen to my shows. But you can find me on iTunes. You can find me on Google Play. And now I'm also in Amazon Audibles as well. Another way you can listen to the show as well. And if you're watching me on Facebook, that probably means that you have gotten social with me, and I do appreciate that. So that means you can follow me on Facebook as M.A.Y.A Presents. And of course, Instagram and Twitter is M.A.Y.A_Akai are the different ways that you can connect with the show. So with that being said, let's jump into episode 18. But before we do that, I'm going to put what the episode's about. I want to dig just a little bit into the conversation about Thanksgiving. Episode 18 is understanding and harnessing the power of empathy. And this is one of those toolbox episodes again. This is one of those things that you got to put in your toolbox. But before we move on to talking about empathy and a very large view, I know right now are challenging times for people. Even if we were not in a pandemic, I'm going to tell you that literally holidays often are the most challenging times for people, even not in the pandemic. It begins around Thanksgiving and it goes past Christmas into the New Year's because there's often a lot of angst, whether it's trying to prepare for Christmas to be able to afford gifts for children. A lot of family issues come out around the holidays. Here's what might be different about this year, and I really want you to think about. For the fact that you could not maybe sit down and have dinner with your family, that means you should appreciate them even more. So any petty argument or issues that you might have had in your family, resolve them and move on. Because if nothing else, this should have put in perspective for you that it's really not that important. Because for everyone who lost those loved ones that don't get to have dinner with them, they would give that back in a heartbeat, those moments, to not have had them. So think about what you're really thankful for. I'll tell you, I'm thankful, one, I'm here and I'm healthy. I'm thankful for the fact that I'm still working, though it's absolute chaos in my job. I'm still working and moving through it. There will always be another Thanksgiving. There will always be another Christmas. There will be another summer. Okay? It's not the last of anything. But because we've lost that comfort, convenience, and control, and we're not used to being in this situation, it seems bigger than what it is. It's not personal. It's really not, but it feels really personal. And this is what we start talking about episode 18 that I personally think is so important. And again, thank you to everybody who's tuned in. Thank you, Maurice, for happy Thanksgiving to you as well. Happy Turkey Day. I'm not really a traditional kind of Thanksgiving person anymore. I'm one of those people that, in the historic kind of backdrop to it, it's not exactly what we were told as children. And I got to know some really very aware and socially conscious Native American individuals. We've had some really important conversations. And just like we've kind of shifted from, Columbus Day, I'm kind of feeling that way about Thanksgiving, and I see it from a different perspective. There's tons of things to be thankful for. And that's where I'm at with this. So for me, it's not really the idea of pilgrims and, dinner with the Indians and things of that nature, Native Americans. It's about being thankful for what we have and celebrating that with others. That's kind of how I see things. So I tend to say happy Turkey Day to everybody opposed to happy Thanksgiving. But beyond that, not to get into semantics about things, episode 18, understanding and harnessing the power of empathy. Okay, like I said, this is a big toolbox episode. And this is toolbox time. What do I tell you every single episode? I need you to take out your emotional intelligence, which hopefully the box is never really closed on it. I'm hoping with your emotional intelligence, you kind of stick it in your pocket, put it somewhere around you, so it's always constantly working for you. Because when you operate from a position of solid emotional intelligence, you tend to make better decisions. So hopefully it's out all the time. But just in case you put it away maybe when you went to sleep last night because you thought you didn't need it, let's take it out. Refreshing. If you're new to M.A.Y.A, welcome. If you're a returning person, you know exactly what this means. When we talk about that emotional intelligence, we refer to your EI, so to speak, as your ability to perceive, control, and evaluate emotions, and then respond opposed to react based on that emotional intelligence. So as I always say, take it out, put it on the table, just in case it was out from you put it away since last Thursday and you only take it out on Thursday, which I know is not true. By now, I'm hoping we've established that it should be out all the time. But just in case you don't use it all the time, I'm always going to remind you, it's one of the most important things you have in your toolbox, which is that set of resources that help you to have a fuller life, to get to that best version of you. And emotional intelligence is one of the most important things you can possibly have in there. So as always, I'm going to harp on it. I'm probably going to talk way more about it than I should, just because I really want people to really begin to embrace it, that when you want to get to the best version of yourself, pull back that veil of self-doubt and self-sabotage. Emotional intelligence will be that thing that will actually help you to be able to do that. So we've had our toolbox time, and guess what? There's going to be another one. There's going to be 2 this episode. Go figure. I think I'm starting to average 2 because we're adding more and more things to your toolbox. Remember last week we put perception versus perspective. And I got good feedback on that episode from people. They said, M.A.Y.A, I never quite looked at it that way. I said, that's the beauty of it. It's just getting a spin, getting a different perspective, seeing someone else's view. So when we talk about understanding and harnessing the power of empathy, let me just begin to say this. There are a range of emotions that truly refer to making you connective with others. And this is really about connectivity. Those emotions are apathy, sympathy, and empathy. Now, just like last week when we talked about perception and perspective, people kind of like to interchange them. And sometimes they can be interchangeable, but they really have standalone different meanings. And when you get the standalone separate meaning, you then understand how to use them differently and more appropriately in situations. See, the problem is when things seem synonymous, we tend to use them that way. And in most situations, they're not being used appropriately. So, Robin Ward Corbis, how are you? Someone dear. You're going to probably be really in touch with this episode as well. I'll have to connect with you outside of this. We're not going to get into it, but just know My prayers and thoughts and all those things go out with you right now. Just know that. So when we talk about connectivity, and it's interesting because before we probably legitimately got to this episode or even the pandemic, if you would have talked to people about connectivity with others, they kind of would have said, whatever. It was unimportant. But now connectivity with others has become one of the most paramount things that people want in their lives because it's been taken away. Or they've lost that comfort, convenience, and control. And all of a sudden, the importance of relationships and connectivity with others, its stock and value has gone sky high. And I think that's fantastic. I just don't want us to lose sight of it once we get back to what appears to be normal. People now are actually having conversations. It isn't just about texting. They want to have that FaceTime, literally. And they're using FaceTime if they can't get that one-on-one time. We've kind of reconnected out of necessity, not because it's something that we always wanted to do. So when we talk about, as I said, that range of emotions that truly refer to human connectivity, remember I said it's apathy, sympathy, and empathy. Let's dig a little deeper and look into the meanings of each of what they mean, because then it will make a little bit more sense as we kind of talk about what we're trying to accomplish here. So when we talk about apathy, which is definitely the one you want the least of, it's the true meaning. If you pull out the dictionary, this is exactly taking this from Webster's. It's a complete lack of emotion about human being or things or an activity. There's an absence of feeling, emotion, interest, concern about something. It's a state of indifference or a suppression of emotion, such as concern, excitement, motivation, or passion. Apathy. Now, when you talk about the flip side, sympathy, the word that you see so frequently used, I can sympathize with this. My deepest sympathies to you. The literal meaning for sympathy is a feeling of pity, which is a word we tend not to like, but it's true in some situations. Sorrow in other situations for someone else's misfortune. It's understanding between people. It's a common feeling. It's supporting a form of a shared feeling or opinion on something. So when you dig a little deeper into talking about sympathy, it's a perception or understanding of a reaction to the need of others. The concern is driven by a switch in viewpoint from a personal perspective to another group or individual with a need. So you can kind of say, I can understand why this is difficult for you. You can see their worldview or their narrative. Doesn't mean you necessarily fully understand it, but you can see it. And because you can see it, you can see where the source of maybe their distress comes from or where the need comes from. So what is empathy, you ask yourself then, which drives this particular podcast, so to speak. It is the one of all of the emotions that is the best to have. But I always say, be careful with everything that you don't overuse it. I have a studio audience, which is called cats. So if you see me doing something odd, it's because I'm swapping them away from wanting to jump on top of my computer, so to speak. So what is empathy? Empathy is the capacity or feeling with another person is experiencing from within their frame of reference. So it's not just saying you understand it. You really get the circumstances that they are dealing with. You see their point of view. And you can put yourself in their position because you can totally see their point of view. And that's a point why empathy is so important, because it goes beyond, oh, that's so sad. Because sympathy only goes so far. Eventually, there needs to be a greater understanding outside of yourself and to be able to connect with others to really move forward and to, if you want to say, have a shift and change, maybe in negative situations. I'm going to tell you where sympathy has played in throughout our society over time. Issues, and it's clear right now, is all get out. But I'm going to give you a couple examples of how it works. So if you, for instance, think about the Me Too movement, we'll start with that. Everybody knows that there's a struggle for women to find equality, let's say in the workplace, opportunities, things of that nature. But what it's really about is, because remember I told you language is everything, it's not really about just equality, it's about the equity and the opportunity. So understand that's a whole nother podcast within itself, is what do you seek in the best version of yourself, equality in a situation, or are you looking for equity? Or do you want a fair balance of both? Conversations to be had in a future episode. And episode 19 is going to dig a lot deeper because we're going to talk about relationship dynamics, especially in the holidays, and really putting into perspective where you are in your best version of you with key relationships in your life. And do they build you up? Do they add or do they subtract to the best version of you? So make sure you're ready for episode 19. Because that's another thing about equality in situations versus equity. Big thing to understand the difference between the two. So empathy, like I said, is the ability to really understand something from someone else's frame of reference. So with the Me Too situation, it was women, okay, we went through equal rights at one point, and yes, we can vote. Yes, we came out the home. We have access to education, but yet we were still struggling in the workplace to get equal pay or to get equal opportunities at positions that were generally earmarked more for men than for women. And eventually, the real conversation came out about the exploitation in some situations with women. Because they were women, to maybe get access to certain things, they were being taken advantage of, is really where the Me Too movement came on. So it was like, yes, we were getting access, but we were having to pay a higher price in some cases to get them. That situation also often applies to minorities. It's not a secret to most people of color that you walk into a situation saying to yourself, I understand. I have to be 10 times, if not maybe 20 times better than my peer who happens to not be a person of color and or might be male, because the expectation on my performance, for some reason, the bar is raised on me. And so I know that I have to do this. The reason we struggle with getting past the idea of racism or genderism and things of that nature, or poverty, is because when you operate from a position of empathy, you can see something from someone else's point of view, and you tend to know the history behind it. No one happens to be in their situation just by accident. And I know that's sometimes hard for people to wrap their mind around because it's easy to blame people. I'm going to give you another example about how sympathy exists and empathy is absent. Current examples. We have seen, for the longest time, the conversation has been there about the disparity in how Black and brown individuals are policed. And yet, for some reason, everyone thought that was a phantom experience. I think that's weird. But I also have to be a person of color, so I know that it's not phantom. And I've had my own small experiences, but I've also seen it in action with others, just by circumstances that I was put in that put me into a different group of people. With that being said, how many times have you heard someone say, for instance, you're watching the news, and I've heard this, and I just kind of looked at them like, that's interesting. Not for me to judge, because empathy is not about judging, by the way. You hear on the news a report of a shooting, and someone dies. And let's just say they're not looked at as being the most kind of upstanding individual in the world, so to speak. Say it was a gang shooting. I'll give an example, because that's one of those things that kind of polarizes people. People will have sympathy when they see their family talking about the loss of life. Look on the news, like so-and-so was shot. We want to find the person who does it. You know, you can feel sympathy for the loss of that family because they lost someone that they love. But instantly, the judgment comes in with sympathy in some cases. And people will say, well, you know, that person kind of lived a lifestyle where they were kind of like maybe destined to have this happen to them. So the lack of sympathy has a very small range in some situations with people. They can understand the distress and the grief and the loss that the family has. But their sympathy kind of stops right there because now they've inserted a judgment into why that person might have been put in that position that was questionable, and hence look at the outcome. So they judge the outcome, but they do have some sympathy for the family. And they may even say, that's really sad because that person was young, to have such a loss of life so young. But that's it. It's just sympathy. Why empathy is so much more important is because empathy is not about judgment. And that's what's the difference between the two of them, one of the differences. But when we talk about sympathy and empathy, just know this, that each is relevant in human development. Apathy is relevant, believe it or not. Sympathy is relevant, and empathy. For instance, if we talk about this from a standpoint of early childhood, apathy is your emotional epicenter initially up until about 18 months, give or take. When you come into a world as a child, as an infant, you know nothing. All you care about is your immediate needs being met. That's it. You don't know anything about the world outside of you, how it functions, operates. All you know is as a person that when you cry, they give you food, they change you, things are taken care of. Your only known existence is yourself. There is no relevance to the world outside of you. And this actually kind of goes on through being an infant to a toddler, but toddlers do begin to develop a range of emotion. They can often tell when someone is sad. They can often tell when they've done something bad, but they still don't have a full understanding of the world outside of themselves. But their world has expanded that they know there's a mother, a father, a caregiver. There might be brothers and sisters. They know there are other people that are part of their world, but they still don't grasp the concept of emotion. So most young children, hence, they can't have something they want, they throw a tantrum. And if you're like, you don't need to have ice cream right now because you didn't finish this. They pitch a fit because in their mind, I want the ice cream. I have no understanding about why that other meal matters. They're also deductive reasoning doesn't exist either. Because remember, emotion is tied to your ability to reason with things. This is why we have some adults that still have issues because they don't reason things quite well. They should. Emotional intelligence, something that you should consistently be working on with your children because the better they are at it, they'll make better decisions. They'll stop reacting to things and start responding to things. Like just because you feel sad about something doesn't mean this is how you have to respond to it. That sadness comes for a reason. Ask yourself, why do you feel sad? And then in exchange for that, how are you going to respond to it? What can you do? What part of it can you control? Because if something is fully out of your control, that's the first thing you have to acknowledge. And then proceed to say, it's out of my control, but I'm not going to let that emotion consume me. I'm going to process it. I'm going to let it sit there. I'm actually going to let it happen. But what I'm not going to do is act like a damn fool. Kids, when they're infants and toddlers, they act out because they have no ability to reason any of that. And the epicenter of the world is them. They are the sun and everything revolves around them. And eventually we start telling adults, the world doesn't revolve around you, right? Because you're supposed to learn that over time. Just so you know that. So when we talk about early childhood, apathy, which remember we said is indifference to things, just not being necessarily emotionally connected, isn't intentional. It's just by sheer existence of you don't know any better at that time. But as you develop over the lifespan, emotions evolve. So empathy may exist, let's say, even a little bit through adolescence, but it really starts to diminish and you gather more sympathy. It becomes a part of your emotional toolbox due to expanding personal relationships. You get friends, peers, your family members. You may build relationships in schools, going to church. You may be in sports. So now you begin to connect with others and you start to see how other people are experiencing life. Now, it does not mean that you fully connect to their experience. I'll tell you what's interesting, and I don't know if Robin is still tuned in. I've known Robin, who I said hello to earlier, since kindergarten. We started in kindergarten and went all the way to 12th grade together. Robin is white, and obviously I'm Black. And we began to have really salient conversations about our experiences growing up as adults. And it's interesting because when I say the sympathy part, I absolutely believe throughout us growing up that there was a sympathy that I was her Black friend. But for a while, Robin didn't realize I was her Black friend until we got to high school. And she made a comment because we were in a play together that, it was South Pacific, and Robin is Italian and Irish, and she's very fair. And she said, Maya, we got to go get a tan. And I looked at her, I said, I don't need a tan. And she looked at me like, that just didn't dawn on me until right about now, which is the beauty of our relationship, is that we were accepting of one another. Values. And we often say if we could see the world through the eyes of children, we probably would be better off because children learn a lot of their deficiencies and ignorances from adults, if you want to know the truth. So if we could learn to be better about what we show to our children over the lifespan, they'd be more well-adjusted. But my thing about sympathy is you may see occasionally something that happens to your friend. And we've had conversations and brought in other people of color that we went to school with, and we kind of started to talk about our experiences. And the thing that was interesting is some of our peers didn't even realize it was happening. They didn't know. But we also didn't talk about it because we always felt the few, and we had adjusted and unfortunately normalized some of the inappropriate behavior that we got from others. Because generally speaking, our experience was good. So when it was brought up, I think people could sympathize, but I don't think until we started to have real conversations, they could truly empathize what was going on. So understand that I do believe kids now are learning empathy earlier because the world in front of them is transforming different. They're seeing so much strife and just difficulty and hate, but yet at the same time, they're seeing peace and love. The balance is so huge. I kind of think it's a lot emotionally to process for children. And that's why I hope parents are having good conversations with their kids about what's happening in the world around them, because this will make them so much better in tune adults with the idea of being apathetic. So the lifespan is about evolving. So the interesting part about empathy, however, it is a personal journey that you move beyond yourself. So empathy is about stepping outside of your worldview, which means everything you may know and learn and has been your experience, it doesn't mean it gets discounted. And this is one of the conversations that drives me crazy with people, because people feel that if you have any form of compassion or empathy, that it means denying who you are. It does not. A big part of empathy is being able to reconcile your real view with the world outside of you. And that's complicated because that is a journey. It's a journey that requires being open-minded, being that one person's experience doesn't discount yours, but yours also does not cancel out theirs. It's about there's enough space for everyone to exist. The question is, are we willing to be open enough to let that space actually exist? And in our current society, no one wants to give anybody space to do anything. And that's really the sad part, is I look at all the conversations about politics, like Democrats, Republicans, and I look at these people and I say, you do realize there's enough space for us all to exist. We don't have to just agree. We can disagree, but why can't we do it respectfully? Why can't everyone speak their opinion and we figure out how can we meet in the middle? Because like I said, there is enough here for everyone to not just survive, but to thrive and to be able to get to be the best version of ourselves. But right now, no one's listening. Everyone's talking, but no real conversation, no real salient conversations are happening, unless you're here, I suppose. So the key thing is you will not get to empathy, which means stepping outside of just your view of the world and being able to see someone else's without judgment. Well, without saying, well, if you didn't do this, then this wouldn't be the case. You might be right. But a person might be incarcerated because the opportunities were never presented and they felt that was the only option they had. But what happens if their experience is only encompassing of that? That's the thing about poverty. Nobody chooses that they want to be poor. No one chooses they want to really be incarcerated and have a background and can't have a job and no skills. But if those are the cards you dealt, some of us have been lucky enough to be given resources and opportunities that those cards might have been dealt, but we threw them back in the deck and said, deal me some more. Everybody doesn't have that. And it could be based on gender, it can be based on race, all kinds of things. So just know, don't make the assumption because what you see is always the full reality of something. Remember that was last week's episode, perception versus perspective. Go back and listen to it. It was good. It was legitimately good. So empathy is about a personal journey that moves beyond yourself. It starts to incorporate so many other pieces. There's always a takeaway to these things. Understanding how to use each. Apathy when it's applied, and if you're still doing it as an adult, you should be concerned. Sympathy, sometimes just being sympathetic is more than enough. Everything doesn't require empathy, by the way, but it's based on the situation you are faced with. It's in your face. What's going on with that? That's a takeaway. Now, here's something that's key. As I say that's a takeaway, I want you to keep something as a warning. Apathy is not always related to underlying conditions like depression or anxiety, because people often think that it could be like a mental health or mental wellness issue. It may be caused by drug abuse. A lot of times extreme drug abuse does result to apathy, a loss of faith in oneself. If you've always been stacked with challenges, you've never felt successful, and you believe that you will never reach your goals, sometimes apathy does set in. You just give up. You give up on you, and if you give up on you, there's no way you can ever be sympathetic or apathetic because you don't honestly care about you. And grief and loss can be a huge part of apathy if you're not. You can be consumed by so much grief. And for people who have experienced loss, I can honestly tell you, I've seen so much loss and I've had enough loss in this year. If I wasn't the kind of person that believe you must rise, you will be challenged, and I have a different kind of perspective about death, and that comes from me practicing Buddhism for a while. I still grieved, but it was in a space that I had a greater understanding. But those things, if they're compounded, if it's always an issue for you, if you're constantly being challenged, apathy can settle in. And this is why it's so hard. I often look at when I work with children, especially that are wards of the state, that have been in foster care. And I hear a 10-year-old that has absolutely given up on life and they've not even lived. But that's not their fault. And if the situation never changes for them, why would they ever all of a sudden become an adult and think that the world is a better place? So understand, experiences is all you know. And your experience is going to shape your worldview. So it's really hard to connect to somebody else's worldview if your very own experiences is only laden with negativity. So when you see somebody who seems like they're struggling, I always tell you, everybody has a story. And if it matters, maybe sit down and have a conversation with them about what the struggle's about. I'm having a glass issue right now. Okay, there we go, it's better. So that's a warning that everything about apathy is not always a mental illness. It can be rooted in other things, not just depression or anxiety or some mood disorder or being, schizoaffective or schizophrenic. It legitimately can be life circumstances can just make you into a very apathetic person. And what's interesting is I think a lot of people legitimately are apathetic and they don't even know it sometimes. They don't even know it. And that's the part that's so heartbreaking that we can see it and go, wow, we often say? She's a negative Nancy. He's a negative Nancy. He has an attitude problem. So we're being judgmental. The journey with apathy really pulls you outside the scope of just seeing things in that way. And that's a part that's so key. I want to share a comment. I love when people weigh in on things. Hello, Anita. She said, "Thank you, Maya. I so need this positive reality check. I'm grateful for your knowledge and digging deeper about ourselves. Keep spreading the uplifting words. You never know who you touch and how it can change their life in a positive new beginning. I can listen to you for hours. Many blessings." Thank you. I appreciate it. My whole thing is, I'm hoping if I change one person's life, if I save one person, I feel like I've done something amazing. I mean, I think it's about sharing information. Future episodes will really move towards resources. Because what I find is a lot of people don't know how to access resources. Like they're like, well, I don't. The reason, I can't tell you how many times someone will say to me in scope of my job, well, the reason I didn't keep that doctor's appointment is I didn't have a ride. And, you know, I kind of get a little annoyed. I do. And then we look at their insurance, which it might be a state funded. I said, you know, most state funded insurances like Medicaid, Medicare, whatever you have, if you're in Illinois, and it might be very similar in other states. I can't speak to it, but if you ask me, I'll find out for you. You can actually have a case manager that will help you navigate many of the situations you have beyond health. They realize if you have obstacles that keep resulting in health issues, stress, depression, you can have a case manager that will help you address those things, and transportation is always available to you. Most people don't know that. But that's why I want to share, is that you never have to miss another appointment. And if you're having issues with, drug abuse, homelessness, actually employment, you can have an assigned case manager through your insurance that wants to help you get to the best version of you. Because if you are healthy mentally, emotionally, and physically, guess what? That's less of a bill somebody has to foot. Just being honest. So resources, people don't know enough about them. So I want to take a quick break because I want to share something as we dive a little deeper into this conversation. I want to share this PSA that's done by One Chicago that I think is amazing. And it really gets to the core of so many really, really, really important things. And I want to share it with you because it's going to kind of help move forward in this podcast about how, believe it or not, compassion is so important. It's one of those things that's built in that we should know. Sit tight and listen to this particular PSA. I'll take a break and we'll be back and wrap up the conversation, the second half of the show. You're tuned into Maya, my ambition, your ambition.
Compassion, noun. Sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings or misfortunes of others. We're all born with it. It's in us. Don't believe me? When you hear a baby cry, something pulls at you. You want to ease that pain. You want to soothe that hurt. No one had to teach you that. It's called compassion, and it's in you. However, at some point you turned it off when it came to me.
Me. The cries of my soul have gone unheard, but today, you will hear me.
My heart has wailed a melody loud enough to shatter your ears and you ignored me. But this week, you will hear me.
This body has beat the drums of anguish, only to be silenced. But this month, you will hear me.
This year,
this decade,
this century,
I will be heard. And
you will be the one to hear me.
And when I am finally heard,
show compassion.
Show compassion.
Show compassion.
Remember, it's in you.
But that is a very profound element.
With coronavirus still spreading, people at higher risk must take extra precautions. You're at higher risk if you are over 65, or if you have any serious underlying medical conditions, like heart disease, chronic lung disease, diabetes, or if your immune system is compromised for any reason. If you're at higher risk, wash your hands frequently with soap and water for 20 seconds. Avoid touching your face. Disinfect frequently touched objects. And wash up after being in public spaces. And when it comes to social situations, less is better. Stay 6 feet or 2 arm lengths away from other people. Better still, stay home if you can. If you're sick, please stay home and away from others. And if you think you've been exposed to the virus, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. In challenging times, the choices you make are critical. Please visit coronavirus.gov for more information.
Welcome back to M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. This is episode 18. I'm chugging along. I've been consistent. Anytime I can share information that's going to help people grow and change and get to the best version of themselves, I'm all about it. And right about now, I think the struggle is real with trying to get to the best version of themselves. Life is challenging even without the pandemic. You add the pandemic to it, and it's even more challenging. And I think more now than ever is that time to not shift away from trying to get to the best version of yourself, but being even more committed to it. Because it's those moments when you're challenged that you realize where your deficiencies are and where you want to get better. Because, I always say that good is the enemy of great. I stole that from someone, by the way. And I agree with that 100%. That good sometimes make people being comfortable with mediocrity, and they never seem to challenge themselves and move to that next level. Often people don't make a shift and moving in a different direction towards where they want to be until they're forced to do so. So I always say, use this time to challenge yourself. Look at where you've struggled, why you've struggled, and how can you change those opportunities for yourself is so, so key. Remember, you can always find episodes of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition at myakai.com, as well as you can find me on several podcast platforms, iTunes, Google Play, Amazon Audibles, as well as iHeartRadio. But of course, my preference is for you to go to myakai.com. You should always get social with me. Hopefully you already have. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Maya_Akai and Facebook, Maya Akai Presents. So let's get to the second half of the podcast. We're going to have our second toolbox moment because we're going to take probably this one out every single week, just like we do with emotional intelligence. We're going to take out subjectivity versus objectivity because it's so really important in the scheme of things. Remember, when we talk about subjectivity, that's based on your personal opinion, interpretations of something, point of view. It's really driven by your emotions and your judgments. Whereas objectivity, that's the thing you really want out of your toolbox with your emotional intelligence. It's fact-based, it's measurable, it's observable. It's not driven by opinion or feeling. It's like, these are the facts. So when you're doing something from a objective perspective, you're dealing in facts. So last week we talked about perception and perspective. So things like perspective and emotional intelligence should be working and operating from a position of an objective view of what's happening. So part of when you talk about your worldview, and I love this particular, picture because it kind of says the world you see in your eyes, your experience they shape your worldview ultimately. How you see things, how you think things are. And last week in episode 17, which I would encourage people to go listen to again, because it talked about reality, and reality is not subjective, it's fixed without doubt. But people tend to see things through their lens and assume that what they're seeing is what it is. And there's many times that we know that not to be the case, that it's not always what you think it is. So go back and listen to episode 17. It's worthy. I'm going to keep saying that because it really ties well into this one. So make sure you now take out objectivity out of your toolbox and it's sitting on the table with emotional intelligence, because the rest of this conversation will be driven by it. So when we get past the idea of, now we're talking about emotional intelligence and objectivity, let's have some real talk time. Some people value empathy more than others. Some people could give a what about empathy. They could care less if they connect with somebody else's experience. We would probably say those people are apathetic, so to speak, like, wow, you care so little about other people. Or you got some people that I said sympathy could also be rooted in pity. And to be honest, most people don't want your pity or your sorrow. They want you to understand where they're coming from and why it's an issue for them. And this is why empathy is such a different beast altogether, because it means you're giving something more of yourself that's truly rooted in connecting with others and understanding their point of view and being able to process their worldview as much as you possibly can. So your worldview, it's your guide to connectivity with others. And this is what's so important, is that you absolutely never have to negate who you are and how you feel to accommodate others. See, this is the problem when you talk about people trying to meet people in the middle. For some reason, they think it means surrendering. And it doesn't. It means understanding and having perspective on something and using your objectivity to see what's going on. But no one ever said you have to compromise who you are to understand someone else's worldview. Because here's the thing, it's based on their experiences, and their experiences isn't your experiences, but it doesn't mean they cancel each other out, because different experiences can clearly exist in the same space. But we've begun to tell ourselves that it's all about me, it can't be anybody else. And if that's how you think, that's an awful perspective to have about life, because you're not on a silo or an island by yourself, where only you exist and only you matter. And if you have someone like that in your life, God bless you. May the force be with you, because I don't know how you do it, because it's absolutely exhausting. So real talk, some people don't value empathy more than others. And I think that's a piece that's really key to understand. So know there's a time for sympathy, and there's also a time for empathy. Every situation, this is key, and this is a takeaway. Every situation does not mean you have to connect at the highest level with an individual's issue. So someone may bring something to you, and it could be a serious situation that they're having. And sometimes being sympathetic, which means you understand where they're coming from and why the way they feel, but maybe it doesn't quite resonate with you. It's okay, depending upon what the situation is, I suppose. Now, if it's like a gross negligence of something like abuse or a lack of opportunity or something like that, and you can't really connect with them and see their framework of why there's despair and grief and issues for them, then that would kind of bother me. But every situation that a person floats your way doesn't mean you have to be like absolutely in tune with it. And see, this is why we live in a world of absolutes, which I'm trying to challenge people to see outside of that. You never have to always operate from a position that something is absolute. It's either black or it's white. Believe it or not, the world is full of grays. I know people don't like them, but they exist, and they exist for a reason, because everything is not always absolute. There's a couple things in this world that are absolute. For sure. Life, death. The sun will rise and set. You will see the moon. There are certain things that are absolute, even paying taxes, and some people avoid that. But seriously. But beyond that, there's a lot more flexibility in situations in life, and people refuse to be flexible. They assume it's either this or it's that, or maybe not. It could be this right now, but maybe it's going to be that later. Who knows? But when you're flexible, you understand those situations for what they are. So remember, I'm going to say it again. Every situation does not mean you have to connect at the highest level with an individual person's issue. And for some reason, there are a lot of people who feel like I got to be 100% in, or I just shouldn't do it at all. Well, okay, but if you're given 90 and that 90 is legitimate and it's honest and it's true, it's 90. Because sometimes you can't fully understand someone's experience, and maybe it takes you more time to get to 100%. See, that's the other fallacy we put in life, that if you're going to be empathetic, it's like you're dialed in right now. You're right there. You're right now. You get it. No. Sometimes you need time to fully understand someone's worldview and the framework they're working for, because maybe they haven't shared everything you need to know. Or maybe for you, right now in society, and this is interesting, when Black Lives Matter came out, what was it, in 2013 or something like that? I may be off a year or two. Most people who were not people of color clearly could not get it. They kept saying, well, all lives matter. I'm like, you're not getting this. And some people still say that. And I look, I'm like, you're not getting this, because they lack real empathy. And they can swear they understand the situation. I'm like, clearly you don't. Because when you look at me and say all lives matter, that tells me that you don't get. When someone says Black Lives Matter, they're not saying all lives don't matter. They're saying in this situation that's going on, there's not equality in treatment, and the equity conversation is entirely different. So hence, put the conversation in the proper framework before you try to insert something else into the conversation. What's interesting to me is fast forward to 2020, and all of a sudden, non-people of color, aka white people, all of a sudden get Black Lives Matter. And I'm still scratching my head on this. Now, mind you, the George Floyd situation apparently opened the eyes to the nation. But the problem is, there were tons of situations that led up to this that were never fair. So I was like, so you actually physically had to see a man begging for his life and he had to die? Makes me a little nervous about that level of sympathy. And even within that sympathy, there were people who was like, that's so sad. He should have never died like that. And then went back and made him and took his background and said, well, maybe that happened because he was a criminal, which means you absolutely are not empathetic and take your sympathy someplace else because it's the worst kind. Pity of his death that should have never happened. So the interesting thing about it is that a lot of people don't get it. And I still feel with Black Lives Matter, and I'm going to say this and don't take it personally, I don't know how many people who have come on board fully understand the gravity of this situation. They don't know the history. And it's deep and it's ugly. And if we ever pulled back that veil, it would not be good. But I also feel until we pull back that veil, we don't resolve our social issues, our racial issues in this country. Because we're operating under the guise that things get better. Well, not necessarily, but it's interesting how all of a sudden there's a lot of empathetic people, but I question the level of their empathy, because empathy is about being non-judgmental. And I hear someone saying they fully support something, and then I hear a judgmental analysis of something. So I believe there's a transition with learning empathy. There's levels to empathy. And that's why I said you may not be at the highest level of being empathetic with someone. You may not be 100% in, but you're like, absolutely, that was wrong. I could see why this is the case. And I've had someone say to me, and I'm still figuring out how we got to this point. I respect that honesty. I've had white friends that say, this is wrong. This is egregious to me. And I never realized it was this bad. And they'll say, and I'm not quite understanding why it's still this bad. They owned it because they were living in their own space and not realizing that outside their worldview, there was a whole nother world happening that wasn't necessarily good for people. So it's interesting that with empathy, though some people are dead in and they're protesting, I don't know how many of those people really understand the breadth and the depth of the situation that goes well beyond Black Lives Matter. Just something to chew on about empathy. Okay, so when I said that every situation doesn't warrant that you have to be necessarily 100% empathetic, sympathy may mean you can understand and the stress and feel some type of degree of pain, but you don't fully connect with that person's personal experience. And that's okay, because sometimes sympathy, as long as it's not pity and sorrow and, oh my God, I feel, no one wants that. But it might be your first step in beginning to understand a situation that will lead you to understanding where empathy would come from in that situation. So it's a journey, and that's why I'm okay with it. Empathy is that level of understanding where you emotionally and mentally immerse yourself in the experience with the person. And you stand shoulder to shoulder and you're willing to weather the storm with them. And it's interesting because with Black Lives Matter and what happened with George Floyd, we saw a lot of people get involved in protest and they were present, but I still don't feel like we had the right conversations to make them understand, I need you to stand next to me when this is no longer relevant to anybody, because the injustice, the lack of equity is there. And if we're really going to have a true alliance, then it isn't just about this moment in time and protesting. It's about how can we change, because there is an immense amount of talent throughout this world. It's about giving access to opportunity, that equity piece. I'm going to keep saying that. So if we really want to make sure that the empathy was authentic with what we just saw with Black Lives Matter or in the Me Too movement, you will see a shift in how we decide to deal with people and support their causes, because it doesn't just stop today. We keep working through this. We work on legislation. We address poverty, and not by means of charity, but by truly creating change and opportunity so that people can not just survive, but thrive and become the best version of themselves. And that's the thing about empathy that's interesting. Now, when you're navigating connectivity, this is interesting. I'm going to say it again. It means you have to learn how to reconcile, and this is the complicated part, your worldview with the world outside of you, which means you absolutely can sit in comfort with your experiences. It never means that you have to negate or change who you are to accommodate somebody else's experience, because this is not what empathy is about. It means I'm comfortable with me. This is my worldview, but this is not yours because my experience wasn't your experience. Hence, I'm going to tell you something that people have a tendency to want to do. There's this huge tendency that people often think that Black people are homogenous, like we're all the same people. Like, no, we all have different experiences, background. Everyone didn't grow up in poverty. Some people, are college educated. Some people's parents are. Some people are whatever. We're just like everybody else. We are not homogenous. So hence, the first thing you can do is say, I need to look at people individually as well as groups to kind of see the totality of thing. But you never have to negate your experience to accommodate someone else. You reconcile it. So what you say, and this is the thing about poverty and more importantly, about privilege, That's key. People always feel like privilege is a dirty thing. Of course it isn't. It's what you do with your privilege that can make it an ugly thing. So, with that being said, if you happen to be wealthy, don't feel guilty because you're wealthy, especially if you worked for it. If you happen to be someone who inherited money, somebody worked for it. It is what it is. But my thing is, don't overlook the fact that everyone doesn't have the same opportunity as you. And if you could somehow offer opportunity to someone, be understanding and don't think and be an elitist like, well, everyone's not meant to be wealthy. Well, but we do have a disparity within our society with wealth. It's the same thing about, we could say there's privilege in everything. There's privilege in beauty, which is purely subjective. There is disparity in education. Just because you have access to education doesn't mean everybody else did, and you should be understanding of it. I'm going to give you an example about how privilege can be taken, the simplest form of privilege can be taken advantage of. For the longest time, we assumed that if people had disabilities, like physical disabilities, being blind, maybe being confined to a wheelchair, okay, well, that's unfortunate for you. We had to pass laws with the ADA to accommodate them in public spaces and sometimes even private spaces, because we took for granted that we could walk, we could see, we could hear, and didn't take into consideration for those who couldn't. So laws had to be passed to make that adjustment for individuals, because somebody who understood that to not have those deficiencies was a privilege, but it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with those people and they shouldn't have the opportunity to still have a full life. They just need some other accommodations. That's taking your privilege and not assuming it's okay and that other people should have to live in that disparity. It's that simple. So we should stop trying to make privilege a bad thing. Like I said, it's not a bad thing. It's only when you use it against people that it's bad. And this is where people who are empathetic and who happen to have privilege, they reconcile their worldviews with others. And that piece is huge. That's that piece about reconciling the worldview where it comes in. Now, warning, Will Robinson, warning. Putting yourself in someone else's shoes can be beneficial. But, and I mean but, when it becomes your default mode of relating, it can blind you to your own needs and make you vulnerable in some situations. Hence what I just said. Just because you are expanding your worldview to understand someone else's doesn't mean that you have to all of a sudden make yourself feel like a bad person because maybe you were on the upside of a situation versus they were on the downside. The key thing is you realized you reached down and said, let me pull you up. Let's meet in the middle. Let me see what I can help you to do to kind of bridge this gap. That's the key point. But if everything you do is always it's negative about you and you neglect your own needs because you feel like that's the only way that somehow you can make a wrong a right, that's the worst thing. That's not empathetic, and that's a dangerous situation. And there are people like that. I will absolutely sacrifice my happiness and my needs to appease other people or to attempt to right something that maybe I didn't necessarily make a wrong of, or maybe I'm a part of something that makes it wrong, but I have to neglect me emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, or financially so that I can fix this situation. If it's about neglecting you, then you know what? You need to go back to square one, because you need to have a balance within yourself and understand your own value and your own worldview and your experiences and how it plays into something before you can decide you want to be empathetic to someone else. Because the first question is, how much empathy do you have towards yourself? Are you forgiving towards yourself when you make mistakes? Do you understand that everything is not always going to go the way you want it to go, but you have to be able to make adjustments? So we often have a tendency to want to fix other people. We ourselves, the struggle is real. We have some things that we could work on ourselves. And a lot of people legitimately, they don't want to be honest about it. They want to be in denial about it. And it's just not healthy. So as we wind down this podcast, episode 18 of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. Make sure you check out all 17 episodes. You can go to MAYAAkai.com, of course, to listen to previous podcasts, as well as remember, there's always a podcast resource section. So I always give some supplemental materials that you can read through to kind of expand the concept or what we talked about on the podcast. So you can only find that though at MAYAAkai.com. Click on podcast resources and just find your episode. Of course, you can always find me on other podcast platforms. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, iHeart, and now on Amazon Audibles as well. Make sure you get social with me. You can always find me on Facebook at M.A.Y.A Kai Presents, and then on Twitter and Instagram at Maya_Akai. And of course, subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is M.A.Y.A Akai. So make sure you tune in. So as we give final thoughts on this, You can't always walk a mile in someone's shoes, but you can understand the road they travel. And that's the key thing. The first part of really kind of growing your empathy wealth, becoming a more empathetic person, is first saying that person's experience is clearly different than mine. I wonder why that is. Not judging it, because that's a key thing. Because when you're working on real empathy, you ask yourself, are you looking at it from a perspective of non-judgment? Are you looking at it with compassion? And can you really understand their point of view? Those are the things you should be asking yourself when you're truly working on being empathetic towards someone. And let's be honest. If you find that somehow you say, I totally understand why this is like that, but the minute you throw a butt in something, that means you're not being empathetic. You're still operating from a sympathetic viewpoint on something, because judgment has to be removed in order to be empathetic. Whatever the situation that got them there, it's irrelevant. It's where they are, but it's not where they want to be. And then that next piece to that is compassion. Can you legitimately say, I can't imagine what this feels like. This has got to be absolutely devastating. This is tragic. And you can feel their pain because you see it. And you see how their life has totally been either decimated or changed because of their situation. And you have compassion and you want to see change because you realize there's more and there's something better. And you truly can understand their point of view, like, I just don't know. I've given up. This is too hard. And you know what? Sometimes we want to say, roll up your sleeves, pull up your bootstraps. It's not that easy for everybody. It's not. Sometimes some people don't have the mental or emotional fortitude to always be that person. And it takes a lot of courage to say, this is just not a good moment for me. I'm clearly not the best version of myself, and the struggle is real. How many times have you heard the struggle is real? Well, if you find yourself saying that, if you found someone else saying it, the first question you should ask if you want to become empathetic, and this is a conversation you're willing to have with that person, just look at them and say, can you tell me specifically what the struggle is? What is it that you're really having a hard time with? And as you talk to them, be like, so how did you get to this situation? Start to flesh out it. Because remember I told you, everybody has a story. Everybody has a unique situation that has brought them down this path that they're traveling. And their experience is always going to be different than yours. The key thing is, can you be non-judgmental? Can you be compassionate? And can you see the world through their eyes? Can you reconcile your worldview with somebody else's? Because when you learn to do that, that's when you truly begin to have empathy be part of your toolbox. Those three things literally have to happen. And it's key. Empathy right now is needed more than ever. You probably have heard at this point of time that we are having struggles with people not being able to put food on their table. There are people that are probably concerned about, will they be able to, provide Christmas for their family? There's so many things right now where empathy is needed. So one thing I'd like to say, no matter where you're at listening to this show, because this does also, air daily on beatbreakradio.com, which is based out of Atlanta, Rich One Networks. And every new episode happens on Sunday. So you might be listening to me in Atlanta. I appreciate that. Somewhere there's a food bank who could probably use your donation. Somewhere there is a shelter that might need a coat you're not wearing. Somewhere there's a Toy for Tot drive going on that you can donate something. One small thing can change the trajectory of someone's life. Just put a smile on their face is key. So if you're someone who can help be part of that, be part of it. Be part of the solution and the change and not the challenge. Right now are difficult times for people. So I would challenge everybody, help somebody else, have some empathy. And if you have to start with operating from a place of sympathy because you fully can't get to being empathetic, just don't do it with pity and sorrow, because people don't want that. They just want understanding and some feeling. And that's the first step in a big time journey. All right, everybody. That's it for me. Thank you for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. Remember, I said that the whole purpose of my podcast is to help you get to the best version of yourself. We want to identify your ambition, help you harness that motivation, and help you acquire the success and satisfaction that you seek in your, not just life, but it should be your everyday life. I told you where you can find all my previous episodes, so make sure you tune in, listen, keep working from whatever episode you're at. But until next time, everyone, and this is something that means a lot to me, and I think it has more value now more than ever. Remember, your present becomes your past, and your future is no more. So make the most of every single day. And if you've never chewed on that saying, I say, think about it. Your present becomes your past, and your future is no more. Because every day is part of this amazing landscape that is your life. And we want to make you be the best version of yourself because you're putting the work in, but more importantly, you deserve it. Until next time, everybody, happy Thanksgiving and take care and be safe.
Get inspired, get motivated with M.A.Y.A and the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast.
Something that I take pride in is trying to be forward thinking outside the box, challenging myself. And as I challenge myself, hopefully I challenge you.
Find M.A.Y.A on Twitter and Instagram at M.A.Y.A_Akai. On Facebook at M.A.Y.A Akai Presents.
We're going to talk health, wealth, fitness, mental health, financial, lots of different things that can empower you as you seek out the ambition that you're pursuing.
Or get everything M.A.Y.A at M.A.Y.A Akai.com.